about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, back to Liberty Talk Radio. Folks, just recently I saw an interview with on YouTube. I'm not certain what the program was, but the person interviewed was Professor Richard D. Wolff, and I've heard him speak several times. A brilliant man. He's with the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and he's on TV quite often, usually what they call the left wing of television broadcasting. And I found the conversation extremely upsetting. Here's a man who I believe, if you look at his biography, spent most of his life, if not all of his life, in academia. That means he never went out and started a business, failed, as most people have who start businesses. They fail at one point in time in their lives, and sometimes they fail several times. Some of the most successful people in the world have failed numerous times, and when you speak with them about their businesses, they love talking about their failures, because their failures is what made them successful. Well, I bring that out only because Professor Wolff, I do not believe, now I could be mistaken, but I do believe he has not experienced that. I think he's been a educator all his life. He's highly regarded. Obviously, he's got a wonderful job, a high-level job in economics with the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and he's well respected. And quite frankly, I've listened to him several times, and sometimes,
You're about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced. About to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, back to Liberty Talk Radio. I'm Joe Cristiano, your host today. What I'd like to talk to you about is an interview that Professor Richard D. Wolff, University of Massachusetts, Amherst, had on in fact, I found it on YouTube. He had this, he was being interviewed, and they talked about the universal basic income. Now, Professor Wolff is a very intelligent man. In fact, I enjoy listening to him. In some cases, I even agree with him. But I couldn't disagree with him more with his position on universal basic income. When I listen to him, I think to myself, you know, before a economics teacher or someone in the business realm, you know, is allowed to discuss economic factors, they should have experience in the business world, preferably in their own business. Most people who have been in business for quite some time and been successful, they talk about their failures and what they learned. They understand the climate of business. They understand what works, what doesn't work. Professors seem to take a position that boss is bad, employees good. And there are ways to correct that misalignment in the favor of the employees. Now, I've been in business for a long time. In fact, I'm retired from an international company. I had a wonderful job there. And when I left, I decided to go in business for myself. And that was no easy chore. There was lots of failures. And when I talk about my businesses, I don't talk about how much money I made or how many clients I have now. And boy, we stood there through thick and thin and whatever. No, I always seem to talk about my failures because I learn from my failures. And as a result, when I hear professors speak about business who I believe have never been through what I've been through, and there are many millions of people who have been through what I've been through, I'm not an isolated case, it really disturbs me. Now, he's talking about the universal basic income. The example he gives is, let's say a factory hires X number of employees, and they're processing on the assembly line by hand. And the company decides to automate it. And most of the people on the line, if not all, lose their jobs. He says that's bad. Well, he said what they should do, he said they should buy the machines and have the people work 4 hours a day rather than 8 hours a day, so they can have the economy of the machines, but also keep the people employed. And he says, as a result, the company makes the same amount of money, in his opinion, and the people have the other 4 hours a day to do what they please. Well, quite frankly, I think the man has lost his mind. First of all, he said the reason for that, he said you want to, the objective here is to save jobs. Well, if you buy the machines and you have the people, you've incurred a double expense. And the only way that you can profit from that is that if you raise the price of your product to cover the additional expense of the business. So let's say the widget that you're making cost $10. Now that you have people, although they're working part-time, and machines, which should be working full-time, but now they're underutilized, instead of that widget being $10, it may cost $12 to produce. Well, if it costs $12 to produce, you're in a competitive marketplace. You're probably not a monopoly. No one's a monopoly today. Because even if you're a monopoly in the United States, there's someone in Japan or someone in Korea or someone in China, someone in Europe or Africa will make it gladly for much less than $12 an hour, and you'll go out of business. He doesn't understand that. And anyway, if you bought the machines, why would you have them pay full price for a machine that should be working 24 hours a day, not 8 hours a day, but can work 24 hours a day with just a small staff that monitors the machines going and making sure everything's okay? This would lower the price of the product, right? You become more competitive, and the person who gains from that are the consumers. So the consumer, instead of paying $20 for the widget that you're making, now pays only $17, let's say, for the widget. So they gain it, and then they use that widget in their manufacturing process, or if it's an ultra consumer, they keep an extra $3 in their pocket, of which they can spend on something else. Well, all of that escapes the professor. And what company would buy the machines and then also keep the employees? Because the salary of the employees is only portion of it. I know, I'm there now. I still own a company. I own 2 companies right now. You still have to pay the healthcare cost. You have to pay. We have a 401k plan, all this other stuff. You're still paying that. That's still an expense. Yes, you save 4 hours, but that's about it. You have all the other expenses that go on that are required to have a staff of people. Now, what he also misses out on is the fact that if he didn't buy the machines, right, and he saved the work, the jobs of let's say the 40 workers that this plant has, if he doesn't buy the machines, the company that sells the machines may have to lay off people because no one's buying the machine, lay off people, or even close shop altogether if everyone did the same thing, because no shop is going to keep the employees and the machines. The machines were there to replace the employees. Now, listen, this is nothing new. Could you admit, I want to go back to the days before the horse. Back prior to the Egyptians, when they had to move rocks or boulders or wood or timber or whatever from point A to point B, they put it on, they had wheels at the time, so they put it on a plate of some sort of wheeled casing, and they had 40 people pushing to get from point A to point B. Well, what happened when someone said, hey, what if we attach a horse to this? You'll put 40 people out of business. You can't do that. You see, if we abide by this rule of not progressing, we would still be working as we worked. We wouldn't be any further along than we were back in thousands of years ago. We'd still be living in huts and working manual labor. There would be no machines. Well, he discounts all of that. He discounts the fact that people shouldn't buy these machines to put people into business. But even if the person, the company said, well, let's not, I want to save people's jobs. I want them, and I'm not going to buy the machine. Now, the only reason why you would buy the machine is because they're more economical. Maybe a group of people can make 500 widgets a day. But if you had the machines, you can produce 1,000 widgets a day. But that's another story. So you would be making yourself less productive and, as a result, more expensive. Well, now if you're more expensive, your employees may lose their job anyway because your competitor is going to buy the machine and put you out of business. So now his thoughts are, everyone's equal. The government's got to control this so that everyone's on an equal footing. Well, if that was the case, we still have horse and buggies. We wouldn't have cars. We wouldn't have any innovation whatsoever, because anytime there is a product or a product that is manufactured that exceeds the capabilities of the prior product, you typically put people out of business. Now, if in fact you say, no one's going to buy those machines, then the machine manufacturers go out of business. They have to lay off people. So no matter what you do, once you withhold progress, once you stop progress, you lower employment. And all he's doing, and I'm surprised, he's a professor, he's got a PhD, he's got all sorts of awards. How could he not look at this and say, hey, if we don't allow progress to take place, our industry will suffer. All our factories will close. Look what happened to the auto industry in Detroit. They allowed people to work there much too long. they would not allow enough innovation in the auto industry, right? And this gave a heads up to both Japan and China, making parts and full cars. And by the way, the best car today is the Toyota, overall by all standards. And of course the Subaru. And yet, now if you go to Detroit, the place is a ghost town. This is what he wants to see? Does he not realize that if he doesn't produce it, someone else will, and the people are going to be out of business anyway? They won't be working 4 hours a week. They'll be working 0 hours a week. But the point being is that an employer is not legally obligated or morally obligated to hire people. And once they hire them, they hire them forever. Now listen, I'm an employer. I've been an employee and I'm an employer. When I was an employee, I did not want to lose my job. I had several jobs to avoid losing my job. I was in international marine sales. I don't know what a boat looks like, but I took the job because I didn't want to lose my job. And it was difficult. I literally worked 24 hours. I was on call 24 hours a day. But I took it because I had to. I had to adapt. I did not expect my company to adapt. It was either take that job or the road. It was the worst job I ever had in my life. It was the most fascinating job in many ways. It was international at a time where there was no international connections. This was before the internet, before everything. It was archaic as all heck. And you were on call 24 hours a day. But I don't want to go into that. I just wanted to say that when people have a job and they have a manual labor job, they have to have a little bit of self-reflection. They have to say, what would I do if this factory closed? And not consider that the job that they have is going to be the end all and they're going to have this for the next 20 or 30 years and then retire with this gigantic pension and all that. It's the responsibility of the employee to make certain that the jobs that they have, they do a good job, they do the best that they can. But if they lose their job, and most will at one point in time, that they be prepared. Because the employee does not prepare for that day, doesn't obligate the employer to ensure that they have a job. Now, I'd like to go deeper into this, but I didn't want to make it this long. But the people who took those jobs probably took those jobs because they did not do well in school. And quite frankly, I don't blame the students. I don't blame the students of the school. I blame the school system. I think the government being in the school system and then pumping out kids left and right and now paying for their college education, loaning them money for college education, and millions of kids are taking getting degrees in worthlessness. They're going to be placed in the same position as a person who never went to college, loses their job, and then has to say, now what do I do? I have no skills. But now they're going to have that with no skills with a college education and plus, $44,000, which they'll never be able to pay. So what he's left out of the whole system, the whole discussion, is that the free market system doesn't only apply to the businesses. The free market system applies to living. In other words, when people have children, it's their responsibility to educate the kids. They can do it themselves. The government has no say in this whatsoever, should have no say in it whatsoever. They can do it themselves. They can send them to a school of their choice. They can teach them a trade or whatever, like they did back in the old days. And they had to think through the process, saying, I am teaching my children to do, let's say, to program on a computer. But the computer is 10 years old. By the time they're old enough for a job, the computers will not even exist in that way. So they have to look forward to make sure that their children have the skills, the knowledge, and the education, whichever one you want, the skills, knowledge, or education, in order to survive. But that's the parents' responsibility. It's not the employer's responsibility, and it's not the government's responsibility. It's a free market. We should look at the free market as a free market, and employees should tell their employers, please, that you understand that this is a manual labor job that requires no prior education or very little, we have a list of 1,000 people who would love to have your job, and we may automate. And every person should go through that cycle in their own minds, so that when the automation comes in, they are prepared for it. And then giving everyone $1,000 for working half a day, and then the other half a day they take $1,000, and then they can live on it. Where does $1,000 come from? If you apply that to everyone, there are millions of people times $1,000. You're talking billions of dollars every year that are giving away unproductively. There's nothing being produced, but there's money being generated. But he doesn't discuss that because there's no answer to that, because it's almost clinically insane to think that we can do that. And if we ever do, and it wouldn't surprise me if we did, if we actually did go through this, then what would happen, right? We'd have a collapse of the economy and no one would have a job. Okay, well, that's all I had to say today. We do wish that you, if you're listening on YouTube, that you would give us a like and subscribe to our service. I'd appreciate that. We had a large following at one time, and I've been away for some time, and I'm just getting back, and I know our listenership is kind of low, but I'm trying to beef it back up again. Maybe you can be one to help us along. Okay, with that, all right, and this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank everyone for listening in, and please stay well, stay tuned.